each other on a professional level this way, and teaching the lessons that we learned running around with our relatives who we looked up to and gave us great examples, those that did, and learning from those that didn't. Very important. So, but I'm handing over the mic to our board president, Christian, who will introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Cardenas. Everyone here, thank you for making it this morning, enjoying the breakfast. There will be lunch, so don't be shy. And please take copious notes. We have extra notepads because you're going to want to take notes on today's two speakers, the first of which comes from Children's Fund in San Bernardino. He has his doctorate in organizational leadership and management. He is Dr. Pinedo, and he's going to be going over Bridges Out of Poverty today, a fantastic dialogue based on the writings of Ruby Payne.
Thank you. So what a pleasure it is to be able to be with you, especially in light of what's been happening the last couple of years, right? That we can actually gather in a room and see each other not only on a screen. And so I normally walk around when I present and things like that. And so while I'm grateful that we can gather again, obviously because of precautions, I won't be coming to your tables and engaging. And so I'm still training myself and to break that kind of behavior because it's a habit, right? And then the other thing, because we're recording today, in order for this to be available for future participants as part of their training process and onboarding, then that also means that I have a range, and they said you can only go this far on the right and this far on the left, and so that's also extremely difficult because as soon as I'm told what my limits are, I want to push them, right? And so we will have grace with each other this morning, and I'm just excited to be able to share this information with you. So my name is Siriako Quesada Pinedo. My parents, our family is from Temastian, Jalisco, Mexico. And I introduce, or I start that way, one, to honor our family's immigrant journey, because it's that journey that not only brought us here and got us here, but in Spanish we say inculcaron, they just ingrained into us a certain lifestyle, behaviors and habits, and especially mindsets that formed me and that formed us, and that then for me was that launching pad to be able to have that word doctor in front of my name. And I'll share with you that even for those of us that grew up or still live in under-resourced communities, and you'll notice some of the terminology that I use, and I'll explain it in the presentation. I don't say a community of poverty, I say under-resourced. And it'll be part of the presentation, and I'll be able to explain why. For those of us that came, and then the societal pressure, right, of how you're not supposed to talk about your accomplishments, and especially in our Hispanic, Latino, Chicano culture, right? As soon as you start talking about your accomplishments, what do they say? Go ahead, it's not a rhetorical question, you can respond.
I see tu, muy, muy.
I see tu, right? That's the one that you're, mira tú quien te crees, and who do you think you are, right? Dolores Huerta, the co-founder of United Farm Workers Union, I was on a Zoom meeting with her and a bunch of other people about a year ago, I guess, and she said something that really struck me and that I continue to repeat. And she said, seeing yourself reflected brings you dignity. Seeing yourself reflected brings you dignity. And so I share that because as you continue on your journey and as you continue in your professional and educational journey, it is important for you to share about what you have accomplished. Because there is a child, there is a teenager, there is an adult that will see you and say, because he did, because she did, because they did, so can I. And that's part of what this journey is about Bridges Out of Poverty that I'll explain. It's that together, collectively, because someone has, so can we. So Dr. Ruby Payne, if you're not familiar with her work, her seminal work, her first book, is called A Framework on Understanding Poverty. If you have not read that book, I encourage you to get it because that's where a lot of this foundational terminology, and not only that, the vocabulary especially comes from. And so, some key points for today. What we're going to do here is we're looking at economic environment. And so there are assumptions and there's things that I'm going to share that right away you might think, no, I know someone that doesn't do that, doesn't think that way, or doesn't say that. Okay, but we're not looking at primarily race and ethnicity. We're looking at economic class. And it'll make sense as we continue through this. And then economic class is relative. So if I grew up poor and everyone around me was poor, then that's my reality. That's what's familiar to me. If I grew up in middle class or in wealth, and that's only, the individuals with whom I associated with, who I hung out with, right? Then that's what I know because that's what I saw, that's what I heard, that's what I felt, that's what I experienced. The other piece that's important about this is that there's a difference between generational poverty and situational poverty. And we'll explain that and why they're different and the impact that it has on our behavior. And then, again, this is based off of patterns. And so right away, there's something that we may not like that we're reading or that you're going to hear me say. And you can say, no, I didn't think that way. I don't think that way. I don't behave that way, or so-and-so doesn't. This is patterns, which means that there are always exceptions to those patterns. Okay? And then hidden rules, we're going to talk about that and the impact that they have because that affects our mindsets, which, what you think is how you behave, right? And so we're really going to focus a lot on mindsets. And then one of the things that I'm going to share is the culture of organizations and then the impact that it has on us as individuals. Society operates, schools and businesses operate from a middle class mindset and behavior. And I'll explain that. And then for those of us that came from economic poverty, or the individuals that we serve that are in economic poverty, sometimes there's this dissonance, there's this disconnect then from their behavior and what the reality is. And that's in part, we'll see, because of who creates the rules, mandates the behavior. And if you've never interacted with someone outside of your economic class, then you want them to behave the way you behave, right? And when you force someone to do something, what do? They push back, right? And they revolt. And so then, again, it'll be a lot about understanding class, and then also in order to achieve, and this may have even happened in your life, in order sometimes to advance, we have to stop talking to certain people. In order for us to change our behavior, sometimes we have to disconnect from people. And so that means that we're going to look at relationships as well and the impact that they have on our behavior. So a lot of people will say, well, poverty does this to individuals. And so what we know about poverty and what's important about poverty and what it does is that it grinds us down. If you have ever experienced true poverty, economic poverty, where you have nowhere to live, you have little to no food, you have substandard housing, there is a lack of safety, whatever you think of extreme poverty, right? If you've ever been in that situation, then you know the emotional trauma and toil that comes with it, right? And what we say is that you're in survival mode then. And you're in what we call the tyranny of today. That means that the only thing you care about is survival right now. So when I then come and say, hey, I want you to think about your future, that's abstract. The future for you is today. The future for you is that I make it home safely. The future for you is that I get something to eat. The future for you is that I don't get shot. That's as far as you can think because you're stuck in right now in survival mode. And so this grinding down then takes that emotional impact on us, so much so then that it alters our behavior or it impacts the manner in which I can behave. So even if you're telling me that I can accomplish something, I can't hear you because I am still hungry, cold, I don't feel safe. So it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That basic level there. And so in order for us to have some common language here then, this is the definition that we use of poverty. And that is the extent to which an individual or an organization or community does without resources. And so again, we're looking beyond just money. And I'm going to go through this list of resources and be able to explain it. So Dr. Ruby Payne, through her work and through her research, looked at what are the essential resources that an individual needs to be successful. And I use it in air quotes because it matters and it depends on how you define success, right? But when we look at these 11 essential resources, and these are not in order of priority, okay? We just listed them. But financial is one of those resources. That means that I have the money to survive. I have the money to pay for things. Not everything that I want, but everything that I need, okay? And then I look at emotional resources. And so there is such a thing as emotional poverty. If you lack any of these resources, then that is part of your poverty, okay? So I just have the ability to control my emotions. When I experience disappointment or trauma even, I can keep my emotions in check enough to be able to survive and continue moving forward. Mental cognitive, that I just have the mental capacity to be able to do whatever it is that I need to do, whether it be in school, at work, within my family, whatever it is. Language and formal register. This is extremely important. How many of you have heard the term code switching? Okay, somebody, what does it mean?
It is the switching between two different languages within the same conversation.
Perfect.
Maybe even within the same sentence.
Sure. So being able to switch, being able to turn, right, and use an alternative language, okay, within a conversation, within an environment. And so the reason language and formal register is so important is that the way I speak at home isn't necessarily the manner in which I should speak at work, right? And then the way I talk amongst my family especially, right, oftentimes isn't the way I should speak. And so Latinos, we're good at teasing, right? We're good at showing affection by making fun of ourselves and making fun of our family members. And so I can recall my brothers doing that and teasing me as I was going through school. But I know that they love me. I know that they were supportive, right? It's how we show that. But if they are ever in front of a professional setting, right? So we're at a work event and they start teasing me the way they would at home, right? If that happened to you, it would make you uncomfortable probably, right? And that feeling that you get in those types of situations was like, I shouldn't be saying this, or they shouldn't be saying this. That's more like how we behave at home, right? That's the code switching piece, right? And then formal and casual register, and again, we'll give examples of those. Social capital support systems. That means that we have the resources so that when something happens, I know who I can turn to for help. That means that if the power is shut off, I know who I can call. Not only the business in order to get it turned back on, right? But somebody that could perhaps lend me candles or flashlights or lanterns or anything like that. Okay? And so just having that resource, I'm going to age myself right now. We used to say it's your Rolodex, okay? Have you heard the term Rolodex? I was actually doing a presentation, I used the term, and someone raised their hand and they said, what is a Rolodex? And I immediately felt too old for that room. So we used to have our phone books in this roll, it had cards in there, and it was called a Rolodex because you rolled it, and that's where you had all of your contact information. Having that Rolodex, that database of individuals, people, organizations that you can call when you need something. And then physical, just the fact that you can move around. It doesn't necessarily mean to be able to walk or run. It's just that you can move around enough to live or to accomplish whatever task or job is at hand or in front of you. Spiritual, it doesn't mean that you belong to an organized religion. It just means that your ability to have faith in something bigger or greater. That's part of the source of hope. okay? And so just the fact that you can believe in something, you know, and if you're Christian, right, we will say, let go and, you know, let go, let God, right? It just means that I could separate myself from what it is, offer it up to something or someone, and have hope that some form of assistance will come my way. Integrity and trust. And this is extremely important because it's not only personal integrity and trust. I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. It means that the individuals that I hang out with whom I associate, where I work, or anything like that, that they have integrity and trust as well. And the reason, and a lot of this is kind of Captain Obvious stuff sometimes, okay? But the reason that's important is that if I all of a sudden come into money, and you are my best friend or a family member or a close friend, right? I have to be able to trust you that you're not going to take advantage of me. And so integrity and trust comes it's an extremely critical component then of having adequate resources. Motivation and persistence, that you have the ability to be able to have drive, to have energy to move beyond, to want to improve. Dr. Payne uses the term to write your future story and then to work toward achieving it. Okay? And then it also means that you have the ability to plan. And again, somebody in economic poverty, right? Somebody in poverty, they lack oftentimes the ability to plan because they're thinking about right now. The concrete is their reality. Planning is an abstract ability. It means that I have to separate myself from right now, think about something in the future that I can't touch yet, and then I'm supposed to be able to write out the steps in order to get there. That is an abstract ability that oftentimes individuals in economic poverty can't do because, again, they're in the tyranny of today. And then relationships and role models. Someone that you can look up to, someone that supports you, someone that encourages you. I like to say it's the person walking in front of you to show you the way, the person that's walking behind you to nudge you sometimes, and then the person that's walking side by side to encourage you. Having access to individuals or groups like that is important. And then the last one is this knowledge of hidden rules that I mentioned. And these are these unspoken expectations of how you behave or why you behave in a certain way. And we'll go through a chart that examines hidden rules for poverty, for poor, for middle class, and also for wealth. So I mentioned Dr. Ruby Payne, again, that this is just the cover of the book. This is actually the previous edition. Ben, if you don't mind holding up the one right in front of you, that's the newer one. I encourage you, again, especially if you're working in education, to be able to pick that up and look at it. But I'll be covering some of the basic points from that. And then everything that she does is based on this social cognitive theory. And so this is extremely important, again, because we're looking at, they describe it as the marriage between the demands of our environment with what resources we have based on the relationships and the knowledge that I possess. And so that, all those three things affect how I think, right? And if I think that I am a bad person, and I start to believe that I am a bad person, then I will behave in an inappropriate manner, right? We know that our thoughts become our actions. So one of the things that we look at in this then is from this transition from going from under-resourced to resourced. And so these are just some examples of what that line looks like, that continuum of resources. So under-resourced, having an unstable lifestyle or environment, and then all of a sudden I have stability. Somebody, honest to God, one time said, but what's the big deal? So you live in an unstable environment. Why is it so important then to have this stable environment? So I said, you've never lived in instability, have you? And they said, well, no. And I said, then how would you know? How can you understand? But the problem is that we need to help individuals understand the importance of that. Otherwise, their expectations mandate, or they want to mandate, how I behave. And so if you've never experienced poverty, middle class, or wealth, but you're expecting someone else to behave in whichever class, economic class you belong in, you get frustrated then when they can't do that, right? And so that's why that this work is extremely important, because the individuals that you will serve, that we serve, they come from, in my case, at Children's Fund, they come from the economic poverty column. That means we serve children experiencing extreme poverty, abuse, and neglect. And if society operates from a middle class mindset, then traditionally, organizations come in, and rather than ask you about your experience, we right away start to tell you about what you're doing wrong, right? And we right away tell you about what you need to change. That's why it's important to understand this continuum of going from under-resourced to resource. And again, the rest of the list is there. When you actually look at the PowerPoint that was sent to you, I've included all my notes in there. So I'm going to breeze through these slides, but you have my notes in there, so when you can go back and review them, you're also able to see what some of the additional explanations are. So there at your table, please, just write down what you think are the causes of poverty, either in the U.S. or in your community, whichever one. But what do you think are the causes of poverty, okay? I'll give you 1 minute to do this. Then once you've done that, if you've already come up with a couple or a few, there at your table, why don't you just share amongst yourselves one or two of those? I'm going to give you about 15, 20 seconds for anybody at your table that wants to share. So now, I know I'm cutting you off. I apologize. It's just I know because we have limited time, right? I gotta push through as many of these slides. And so, when we look at causes of poverty, what ends up happening usually, and what the research has shown us, is that we come into one of these four. Sometimes some individuals want to say it's just all the individual's behavior. It's all your fault. Regardless of what's happened, it's all your fault. One of the other causes of poverty shows that it's the lack of capital, whether it be human or social, meaning that they lack the resource of having someone to whom they can go to or turn when something happens. Or it's that my community doesn't provide the resource that I need. And we'll go through examples again. Exploitation. The fact is that the reality is that racism and discrimination exists. I don't care if you think it doesn't. There is enough factual, documented, historical evidence to demonstrate and prove that it exists. Because you think it doesn't, that's your opinion, right? But we know that it does. And we'll go through some of those examples as well. And yes, I get animated about that piece, right? Because I've had individuals say to me, I actually had a donor say, racism and discrimination doesn't exist. It's just a matter of mindset. You just got to pick yourself up from your bootstraps. Very few things trigger me like someone telling me to pick myself up from my bootstraps, right? And my response to that is, you assume that I have boots. You assume that my boots have straps. You assume that I know what the heck those straps are for, right? And then your other assumptions are, you assume that I have socks. And the reason that that one is important is because if you've ever worn boots without socks and you move around, you get calluses, right? Your feet hurt differently, you get blisters. That's the issue that comes with a statement like that, okay? And then the last one is political and economic structures. And this one is extremely important because that means that it's the system, right? People want to say the system wants to keep us down. You know what? Sometimes, yes, the system really does want to keep us down. And so we're going to look at that environment as well to look then at these causes of poverty. Is it only one? No. Is it all four? No. Is it a combination of those? Most likely, yes, because they're related. One can trigger then some of the others. And again, I'll show you. And so this chart here, and you'll have this, you have this in the book, and again, you'll have the slides. But this looks at the causes of poverty based off of research, and then also what some of the sample topics are in this. The best example that I can give are these payday loan stores, right? So I get a parking ticket. I don't have the money to pay it. And so that $50 ticket becomes $120, $240, $380, and then $500 and something. True story. Okay, so it ended up being almost $600 when I finally realized I had this stupid ticket. And if I don't have the money to pay for it, then I go looking for it. And so if I go to a one of the payday loans places, right? Yeah, I'm going to get that money that I need at about 1,200% interest, right? Here's why I think that this is the perfect example for this. Because when we look at the political environment, okay, those on the far right usually always want to blame you for your poverty situation. It's your fault. Get a job. Stop drinking. Don't be lazy. Well, it's because you're illegal. They will come up with this great list of all the reasons. I say they're excuses, not reasons. Of all the excuses why it's your fault. There's a difference between an excuse and a reason, okay? If they come over maybe one step towards the center, they're going to say, well, you know, you don't have a good job. So you got to do whatever it is you need to do in order to get a better job. Go to school. I did. You know, hey, I made it. You know, I paid $300 in rent. Never mind that with inflation, that rent is now $1,500, $1,600, right? And yet the salaries haven't grown with the rate of inflation. But hey, they did it 50 years ago, so why can't you now? It's back to a job and to your behavior. Get a better job. The far, far, far left oftentimes will just say it's the government's fault. They should be doing more. They should be giving me more. They should be paying more. They should be providing more programs. Whatever it is, they lay all the blame on the system, on the government. They start coming over a little bit of the center, then they will say it's the government because of the lack of good policy, rules, and laws, and then also because of exploitation, racism, and discrimination. The payday business then, right? They'll say it's the individual behavior. Does the community provide any type of resources? Believe it or not, there are businesses in this country that provide pay advances that don't charge you 1,200% interest, right? And I don't have a problem with the business loaning you money and charging you a little bit of interest. I think it's criminal to charge 1,200% and then screw your credit score, right? Then we know that these businesses exist in low economic income communities. They're on every other corner. If you've ever been to Beverly Hills, how many liquor stores have you seen there? How many payday stores have you seen there? How many pawn shops have you seen there? Bail shops, right? None of those. We know that those businesses exist in lower economic communities. And so the government, we know damn well, that if one of them were being negatively impacted by this, they would have made a law to change that already. Not to maybe close the business, but at least to better control the interest rate. Because they've done that in other businesses, right? So one small example of how all four of these columns can have an impact then on the cause of the poverty for that individual. And so generational poverty we define as 2 or more generations. So that means that my grandparents were poor, my parents were poor, that's all that I know, and so their behaviors influence mine because that's all that I've seen, right? Then there is situational poverty, oftentimes caused by death, by divorce, by unemployment. Something happens that put me in a situation that changes my financial situation, which then can lead to me becoming or falling into the economic poverty class. And then there's middle class, there's new money and old money. Now here's what's interesting about all of these sections. Generational poverty oftentimes doesn't like the middle class. Middle class oftentimes doesn't like the situational poverty or the old money, the super wealthy, right? Even amongst our classes, we discriminate. Even amongst our classes, we criticize. Even amongst our classes, we judge them, okay? And one of the other things we know is that it is extremely, extremely difficult to nearly impossible to skip more than one, meaning jumping from generational poverty to middle class. Usually, for that to happen, there is a significant change in the life and the lifestyle of that individual. Sometimes it's the lottery, or sometimes it's, even inheritance. Sometimes it's because you work hard and you get the training or the degree and you able to buy a house, which becomes an asset now. And so there is a pathway toward it. But you may have seen this in movie, or if you know of anyone from this, old money very rarely likes new money, right? And new money makes fun of how old money behaves and thinks, and old money makes fun of how new money behaves and thinks, right? And so even, again, amongst this, it's extremely difficult and it's hard to jump more than two, okay? And so, again, the research looking, the intergenerational transfer of knowledge means that if I grew up economically poor, and that's all that I know, that's what language, that's what behavior I observe, so that influences then how I behave, okay? And then the GPSP, that goes back to generational, situational, right, middle, new, or old. And then this 3-generation rule, right? You can skip, but it's extremely difficult to go from 1 to 4, okay? So what we know then comes then from what we've had access to, what we've been exposed to. And so we know that knowledge, though, is a form of privilege, right? Because it's true when they say that the more you know, the more you grow, right? And the more you know, the more you have access to. And so oftentimes lacking, or rather preventing the access to these types of resources creates then this situation where we just further perpetuate these class systems. And then we're going to get into what the dangers are of those as well. So we're going to look at mental models, mindsets. We're going to look at these rules of poverty, and then for each of the economic classes here. And then, again, you have the objectives here, and you'll have the slides so you can go into a little more detail of this. But when we look at mental models, have you heard the term mental model before? Okay. So a mental model then, as it says here, it describes this picture of how something is. It also is a great way to show how we spend time. And the reason how we spend time is important is because oftentimes we get frustrated with others' behavior and we say, just do it. Stop wasting time, right? That's a judgment statement. I am judging you without perhaps knowing everything that's going on in your life, and then I am mandating your behavior. And then we wonder why they push back and revolt, right? And we see this a lot in our schools, right? We see this a lot even in our counseling sessions sometimes, right? When we're trying to help guide behavior, right? We can see the pathway super clear, right? On what they need to do. But remember, if you're in the tyranny of today and if you're in survival mode, and you're asking me to think about being out of an abusive situation, being out of whatever it is that is causing me to be here right now, that is an abstract mindset, that's abstract behavior that oftentimes we can't function in, okay? And so then it also then, as I said, determines how we act, and it interferes. So here's what we know about the mental model for someone in poverty. For someone in poverty, the driving force is relationships, The driving force is that I can get to know you, establish a relationship in which if I need something, I can go to you and vice versa. But I prefer going to you than you coming to me. Okay? Think about that. I prefer going to you than you coming to me. Right? The other things in here might be a little hard to see, but it says agency time, transportation, jobs, family, friends. This is how they spend their time. Okay? This is where they are trying to divide up their 10, 12, 15 hours a day. Okay? Those circles on the outside, social services, schools, police, and religious organizations, those are the organizations or the groups that are making the rules mandating your behavior. So, social services, it could be the TAMP office, it could be Medi-Cal, Medicaid, Social Security, whatever it is, okay? They have their rules and their guidelines, and very rarely do they care if it's convenient for me, the user. Oftentimes their hours are 8 to 5, right? But if I'm working and if I don't have a car, I'm struggling to get there, right? And so, but they don't care about that piece, right? You're 2 minutes late, come back tomorrow or another time. What I say is that oftentimes the behaviors mandated by social services, schools, police, and religious organizations are more convenient for them than they are for the user. And then we penalize them for not following the rules, right? And so, again, this is how they're spending their time, and they're trying to divide it up amongst all of those, so competing resources. And then the businesses there, those are the types of businesses that exist in economically poor communities. Pawn shops, liquor stores, we talked about that, the corner stores, the dollar stores, the used car lots, check cashing, rent-to-owns, laundromats. These are often the community capital, social capital that they have available to them. Okay? Any questions about this? Okay. The reason this is important then is that, and I just want to touch on one of them with healthcare. Oftentimes, when somebody in economic poverty, right, needs healthcare, and I can remember my own family saying this, my dad saying, "Esto es para el rico." What does that mean? It's for the rich. It's not meant for me, right? I have a cousin that's a doctor in Mexicali, and I remember one time he said to me, I'm going to say it in Spanish and then translate, and he said, parte del problema con los doctores en los Estados Unidos es que no pueden tratar al paciente porque esperan que van a seguir regresando. So part of the problem with doctors in America and the United States is that they can't truly treat the patient, in part because they expect them to keep coming back. And so he said that when he practices medicine in Mexico, he realizes that he might get 2 visits at the most. And so he has to be aggressive in the treatment because there's no guarantee they'll come back. Because if that initial prescription or medication or treatment doesn't work, they are dismissive right away then about that field, right? So one thing goes wrong and they completely dismiss the entire structure. And that's part of what's wrong with this social coherence piece, is that we create this disconnect then because something didn't happen to work out once, okay? And then the other piece here, or part of what I think is extremely important, is this first one: the need to act overwhelms any willingness people have to learn. That means that because I have to take care of this immediate need right now, I don't care that you want to teach me. The whole teach me how to fish, I'll eat forever kind of crap, right? The reason I say that's kind of crap is because if I don't meet your immediate need for hunger, you don't care about learning how to fish. I have to create stability in your life first in order to open your mind to be able to listen to changing your behavior, okay? And then the second one, the healthier you are psychologically, the less you may seem to need to change, the more you can change. Part of this what's important about that as well is that if there's nothing wrong in your life, then how am I going to convince you that you need to change something, right? if everything is okay, if I'm fed, if I'm clothed, if I'm housed, and all of those things, and you're telling me that something is wrong, I can't believe you because I don't have that discomfort there. So for middle class then, again, the centerpiece is the driving force. In middle class, the driving force is achievement. It's getting something, attaining something, going somewhere, earning something, a job, an education, training, promotion, retirement. Those all come from an achievement driving force. And again, the rules are still created by those organizations, but the things have changed in the middle of the circle here as far as how you spend your time. Now you have hobbies and interests, education, you're career-oriented or minded, right? You have, under children, a soccer ball. That means that they're probably enrolled in some form of organized sports, right? The social media, you're vacationing, health and prevention. So it's the difference between taking care of your health because you have to, or being proactive now in doing something. Credit card debt comes into play here because it's a reality, but it's different as well than in the previous one where the debt is for unpaid essentials sometimes, for utilities, for rent, and those types of things. And then here you have a mortgage. Let me tell you why home ownership is so important, okay? That becomes an asset that you can leverage. So that if something happens, instead of being plunged into situational poverty, you might have access to that equity to be able to take care of a need right now. And that keeps you out of poverty. And that's why the pathway to home ownership is so important. And I know people that own multiple properties and don't even live in any of them because they want to travel or live in different places. But they can do that because they own the asset, okay? Home ownership is one of the keys to middle class. It's what opens that door and that pathway to belong, because you can use that to leverage to be able to get other things. And it's one of the travesties, if you will, of how the credit system is created as well to prevent people. So I can afford $1,500 a month in rent, right? But you don't deem me worthy enough to be able to pay $1,200 a month in a mortgage. And I've been renting for 7, 8, 10, 12, 15 years, okay? The way it's set up absolutely makes it difficult and limits the ability to enter into home ownership. And then the businesses here are a little bit different as well, as you can see. There's actual bookstores, there's banks, coffee shops, restaurants, as opposed to only fast food and things like that. Now, the mental model for wealth, look at how many less things there are inside that circle, just compared to middle class, okay? And they're spending their time in, yes, travel, oftentimes private, the oversight of these corporate properties, they have personnel, they have people that do things for them, right? Okay, and again, if you read the top there, it's the one percenters, all right? So that means that their net worth is about $7.8 million. If they're living on just the interest alone, right? And just for example, we're going to say it's $8 million, and if they're earning at least 5% that they're able to pull from that, meaning that that's the income that they can get off of their investments, right? What's 8 times 5? 40, right? So that means that 5% of 8 million is 400,000, right? That's their annual income, okay? And they're not going to work. That's what they get just for waking up, all right? That's part of this piece about managing these investments. They're in event sponsorships. They're looking at, they have lawyers and accountants that are handling their businesses for them. So these hidden rules that I mentioned a couple times. All of us bring the hidden rules from the environment in which we were raised, okay? And so, again, if it's what I saw and what I heard and what I experienced, then that shapes what I think, how I behave, and who I am. So here's a chart. Again, it's a little bit hard to see, and I'm just going to give a couple of examples from this, all right? But again, this is the mindset that we know dictates our behavior, okay? So let's just look at, money, the second one. In a poverty mindset, money is to be used and spent. You get it, you spend it. Part of the reason is because if you have it just there, and someone knows that you have it, then they're going to come and ask you for some. And if you have it and don't give it to them, then when the tables are turned, then they're not going to give it to you if you find out that someone has some as well. Okay? Then, in middle class, we know that it's to be managed. That means that I actually have a 401k or some form of a retirement plan. I'm working towards that. I am managing my money in order to save to buy a house, save to buy a car, save to go on vacation, save to go to school. Whatever it is that I want to use it for, I know that there's a process to get there, and so I'm managing my money to be able to get it to do that for me. And then in wealth, it's to be conserved. It's not as much caring about my kids getting some money, it's about grandkids getting money, right? And it's invested in usually larger funds, international, crypto, even though crypto can have a low interest point or low entry point, right? These are the people that are buying, $1 million in crypto or $50,000 in crypto, and because it grew then, their 50,000 became 2 million. Those numbers are astronomical for us to think about, right? But the reality is that it happens because they had money to get in early and to make that happen for them. Food is another one. I remember growing up, the question was always, ¿Tienes más hambre? Are you still hungry? Right? They didn't ask if I liked how it tasted. In poverty, the question is, did you have enough? Are you still hungry? In middle class is, did you like it? How did it taste? And in wealth, it's the emphasis or the focus is how was it presented. So imagine a hamburger from McDonald's just in the wrapper, right? Forget the plate, I'm just opening the wrapper and eating it straight out of that, okay? In middle class then, how did it taste? It goes from that McDonald's now to maybe a bistro burger that's, cut in half, and instead of just regular cheese, it has Munster, pepper jack, whatever, you pick it, I don't care, right? But all of a sudden the ingredients that go into making that burger matter. And then in wealth, it's the 3 little mini burgers spread into this rectangle plate, right? And then with, gold sprinkled truffle fries or whatever the heck it is, right? You went from a 99-cent burger to a $100 burger, okay? And again, if all I know is wealth, right? And then you put a McDonald's hamburger in front of me, that's that, what do we say, cara de fuchi, right? It's that face that you make, it's like, oh my God. It's like you've offended them, right? How dare you? Okay, but if that's all that I know, and then you try and expose me to something else without explaining it, that's the reaction and the judgment that I'm going to have, right? And the judgment especially about you that's living in a different economic class. Okay. The last one I want to talk about is let's say language. Okay. So in poverty, language is about survival. It is extremely important that if I don't like something, that I tell you quickly so that you understand it. Oftentimes with some vulgarity, oftentimes just very quickly, short sentences, if maybe not sentences, maybe even just fragments, right? It's like when you ask a kid, why did you do that? I don't know. Well, did you do it? I don't know. Did somebody tell you to do it? I don't know. Right? It's these very short answers to just get out of the situation. In middle class, when we look at language, then, it's about negotiation. So think about it. You're at the store, you want to return something, and you want a discount, and you start negotiating, whether you realize it or not, right? You start negotiating. I bought this, and it's ripped. I understand that it may have been on sale, but I would still like a refund. You start negotiating with whatever language you're familiar with in order to get what you want. You're calling something, right, because there's an error on your bill, you think they should just fix it. I have to prove to them that they messed up, even though I got the paper in front of me, right? That shows that they did. I am still negotiating. And then for language and wealth, it's more formal. It's the structure piece. It's this world of contracts and agreements. However, someone else is doing it for me. So my language then is about networking. Because what I'm concerned about is increasing that Rolodex of people that are like me. I'm concerned with increasing then the people with whom I have access to. Okay? And then again, you can go through the rest of these. These are based off of observed behavior. So yes, some of there are assumptions, and yes, there are some that you will disagree with, okay? But again, this is a mindset that we know can help to determine behavior. So again, and here we're looking about another example of how this inspires or motivates behavior. In poverty, it's about survival. Middle class, we know to work. And in wealth, it's about connections, who you know, okay? 3 things that we know get someone out of poverty: education, relationships, people, and some type of a job or employment. Something that changes my economic income that allows me then that ability to get out. So the next piece here then is we're looking at, again, language. We're going to look at language, story, what we call mediation, and this voices piece. It's a great little chart about the different registers: frozen, formal, consultative, casual, and intimate, and the description then of how each of those operate, and if we look at them, when it's appropriate, how we use them, and when we shouldn't. Frozen is just that repetition piece, right? And again, the example they give here is about religion because they're structured prayers, okay? When we look at this formal consultative, especially this consultative, it's not as direct. So this is somebody expressing themselves in such a way that they're concerned with offending you, and so they may finish and you're like, I have no idea what the heck they said. I still don't know what they want from me. I still don't know what they need from me, okay? This casual piece, what's important there as well is, look at that language, or rather that vocabulary, 400 to 800 words in their vocabulary that are commonly used. It's limited, and it's oftentimes quick, and it's oftentimes just important to look at the nonverbal, right? I could tell you I'm disgusted just by my face, right? I could tell you I'm happy just by my face, right? You learn, especially in poverty, how to read body language, and that becomes an incredible asset, and it becomes an incredible tool that you can use. This, if you haven't seen this research, this really concerns me as well. These are the number of words that a child is exposed to up to the age of 4. So we know that in poverty, in the economic group of poverty, they'll be exposed to 13 million words. Sounds like a lot. Jump all the way to this professional, to this wealth category. We go from 13 to 45 million before they even step foot into school. And then the affirmation versus prohibitions. That means that for every affirmation, every positive thing that's said to them in poverty, they hear 2 negatives. So if a child is getting close to the stove, what's the first thing we tell them? Don't touch is too many words. What do we say? No. And oftentimes not even in a caring way. Yes, it's coming out of fear, right? But I remember getting near the stove and my dad hitting me. Is that a nurturing way to protect? No, I never touched the stove again because it beat the crap out of me. But is that the best way to teach someone to alter behavior? No, we know that, right? And so how then we communicate, and especially this affirmation to prohibition, right? If I am constantly hearing no, or if I am constantly hearing no seas menso, don't be stupid, right? It was said in a much more vulgar way. I won't repeat it because it's being recorded, right? But if that's all that you hear, right, as an adult then, that impacts what you want to hear and also how you communicate. And if you get into a professional setting, then it impacts how you manage people as well and how you lead individuals. That's why something like this is extremely important. So formal and casual. Formal discussion is very direct. It follows, we call it the funnel, the funnel approach, meaning I can start with a large subject, right? And then I start to narrow down and narrow down and narrow down till I get to the specific, and you can follow it all along the way, okay? Casual story or casual talking, man, just jumps all over the place. If you ever asked a kid why they did something and then it takes 15 minutes for you to find out because they were hungry, right? Because they needed a pencil, because so-and-so put that in their hands or something like that, but they've given you this incredible story of how they got there. So formal, pretty straight line, right? And then the casual, it's up, down, and left, right, and everywhere. Again, if this is all you know, then this is how you communicate as an adult. So how we learn then is, and you don't have to fill this out now, right? It's going to be in the book, it is, and in the handouts though, but what's important is for us to look at what exposure we have then to language as well. So my family, how do they communicate? My institution, meaning where I work, how do they communicate? And then the community around me, how do they communicate? Is it more formal or is it more casual? And then in order for me to be successful, I need to learn how to code switch and do both, right? If you want to be an effective counselor, therapist, right, you need to be able to still be professional, but explain it in such a way that if I'm 12 years old, I understand what it is that you're telling me, right? So how you choose those words. And especially in poverty, it's the difference between us having a conversation and you talking down to me. Because as soon as you do that, I don't hear you. Because if it looks like I'm paying attention, and then you ask me to explain something that you said, and I can't, then that brings shame. I'd rather not even hear you, or be what we consider rude behavior and actually look away so that you think I don't hear you, so that you don't quiz me. That's why our language is extremely important as well when we're trying to serve. These voices are pretty crazy too, in this child, parent, and adult. And oftentimes we think the parent and the adult voice are the same, and they're not, okay? We have seen, and we know it's documented, that when a child becomes the parent in the house, right, then they are taking on those roles and they're directing behavior in that parent voice. You shouldn't do that, right? Well, life's not fair. Hey, suck it up, buttercup, let's go. Whatever it is, that's that parent voice. If you don't know how to speak like an adult, though, that child that became a parent then gets into a professional environment, and they think that appropriate language is this parent voice and not the adult voice. And so they are ineffective at communicating then not only their needs, but also being able to provide direction. And so if you look at the adult one, how are we able to resolve this? Is different than, you just need to fix it. The parent says, you go do it. The adult says, how do we help you get this done? What resources do you need? And even if you tell me what you need in order to get it done, I still ask if you need anything from me in order to get it done. And that checking ensures then that I have access to all of the resources and tools that I need to be successful. Mediation, what's important about this piece here is it's a process by which we can get someone to change. And so I'm going to give a very simple example. We will tell a child, be careful crossing the street. That's the one, right? Why? Because you might get hit by a car. So then how do I cross the street? Look both ways. So if you want a behavior change in someone, right, knowing where they come from, economic class, right, what their driving force is, right? If it's someone from poverty and their driving force is relationships, then the first thing I need to do is get you to trust me. The first thing I need to do is to establish that relationship so that you want to hear me provide direction. And then I can go through the what, why, and how, okay? This is an exercise for you to do it after. It's actually practicing the mediation, the what, the why, and the how. And this is probably a good one for you to do if you have some follow-up meetings, because this actually, you can bring in your clinical experience into this. So you're able to share an actual clinical case that you have and how you can walk them through this. I'm not saying that this should take the place of any of your professional studies and practices and methods, right? But I would tell you that when I've used this over my psychology training, right, or I've merged them, I am able to get better results. And then these are just tools. The one I really want to highlight here, and the slide in my notes will have an explanation of these. The second bullet, if you choose, then you have chosen. Oftentimes we use it in a negative way though. If you choose not to do your homework, then you choose to get bad grades. If you choose to hit your brother, then you choose to get hit yourself. Is that the right response? No. If we say, if you choose to eat healthier, then you are choosing a healthier life. If you choose to drink less, then you are choosing, right? So we can change this to still be a positive. Our nature is to connect that statement to negative behavior, though. This is something that I love and I use a lot, actually. It says, if individuals cannot plan, they cannot predict. If individuals cannot predict, they cannot identify cause and effect. If they cannot identify cause and effect, they cannot identify consequence. If they cannot identify consequence, they cannot control impulsivity. And if you can't control impulsivity, then they have an inclination toward criminal behavior. This, being able just to teach this piece, and I've done this with teenagers and young adults and college students, just looking at this without failure, when we work through it and give examples to each of these, you see the aha moments of when they've gone back or they're able to say, had I just caught this before and changed this behavior. And the work that we do in schools or in care, child care, after school centers or anything like that, if we can help with this exposure here, right, then we are teaching them and giving them the resources and the tools they need to better manage their own behavior, to self-regulate, right? So now we're going to look at our support systems. So the CDC here, when we look at what increases stability, it's how we care for our kids, right? What access they have to it. So we know that a caregiver that is in a stable lifestyle and environment, that's the behavior that they teach, right? Because that's their knowledge, it's their mindset, and it's their behavior, so that's what they're sharing, either by directly telling it or by modeling it. And this goes the same for us. In a classroom setting, in a counseling setting, in whatever setting. If we come from a stable environment, then we can model stable behavior. And it gives other examples here as well for families and for communities. So what decreases stability then? I was always surprised when I saw the first one of low education or income. And part of the reason that triggers me is because I think about my mom. My mom, who, again, born in Temastian, in San Rancho, my mom who only went up to the 5th or 6th grade. My dad didn't finish the 1st grade. And my mom, though, would tell me these stories of how she raised us and why she shared certain things with us. So there's 2 that I want to share with you. I'm the youngest of 3 boys, and so I received nothing but love and encouragement from my brothers growing up. That's not true. My brothers one time tied a pack of firecrackers to my tennis shoes, lit them, and they said if I ran fast enough, it wouldn't hurt. Brother told me, he pushed me off the roof because he said if I flapped my arms fast enough that I could fly, right? It's how we played in the barrio because we didn't have, the other types of games and stuff like that. I can laugh about it now. I cried like crazy then, right? The other one, so my mom saw that behavior and she grew really concerned, so she actually went to a psychologist to ask for guidance because her 3 boys were fighting so much, right? This is back in the early 70s, man. And so, that was extremely difficult. And I don't know if she ever shared that with her siblings or anything like that she did that, but she knew that she needed help. The other one that has really impacted me a lot is we were raised not believing in Santa. And so I asked my mother about that once. And she said, ay, mijo, she goes, there were times that we just didn't know if we were going to be able to get you anything. And so I didn't want you to think that you were bad kids because Santa only brings toys to good kids. That lesson has impacted me so much that hate is a very strong word. I hate Christmas. I really do not like Christmas. And in part because of the trauma that it causes in kids and families. At Children's Fund, our biggest campaign is a Christmas toy campaign. If you ever think God doesn't have a sense of humor, I got plenty of examples that he does, or that God does, right? So we collected and distributed, this year, over 60,000 toys and gifts to give to kids that otherwise wouldn't receive anything. But what I say in that campaign is this: society tells kids that if you're naughty, you don't get a toy. And when a child, through no fault of their own, doesn't receive a toy, they start to believe that narrative. And so here is what happens with that child or that kid. When they come back to school, what's the first thing that they're asked? What'd you get for Christmas? And sometimes it's an adult asking the question. It's write an essay, right? Draw a picture of what you got. And then part of what happens, and we know this because we've seen it, that child does one of three things. They tell the truth and they risk getting teased. Because sometimes kids suck and they're mean, okay? 2, they lie, and then I am hoping and praying that if you come over, or if we have show and tell, that you don't ask me where it is. Or the third, and this then comes into our adulthood, is that we deflect. And so I want the attention, so I rather misbehave or do something inappropriate that still gets me the attention of the adult, but I no longer have to talk about Christmas. And so my mother, in her rancho way of thinking, knew the trauma that it could create and chose to do something else, right? The reason then that for me, number one, triggers me is because society would say my mother was uneducated, right? And we knew that we didn't have a lot of money to buy gifts, but she created a stable environment for my brothers and for our household and for myself, that I am okay because of it. And so again, this is a generalization, right? But we know that people in lower socioeconomic income categories are some of the most resourceful individuals, creative, right? Man, give me a roll of duct tape and not only can I fix something, but I can even make clothes, right? We can figure out a way to do something out of necessity, right? And that's part of what comes, and it's part of the danger in judging people in economic class. So what interferes then with that stability and the support systems, and here's a list of them, and there's a description in the notes about each of these, not because we don't know what they are, but it just adds that little bit of added information as it relates to this body of work. So we know this, right? No significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. If I don't trust you, then I don't even want to hear you. And if I don't want to hear you, then I'm not listening. And if I'm not listening, I am not growing because of you. And so the ability to create that speed of trust, as Covey refers to, right, allows us then to have an environment where I can connect with you in such a way that you believe that I want to help you. And in poverty, there's immediate distrust because we are quick to blame you or others for our problems. And so creating a relationship for someone coming from economic poverty is extremely important in being able to help them grow. And then this other one. Human relationship is the sledgehammer that obliterates every societal difference. If I have a connection with you, and I know that you want what's best for me, then regardless of those 11 resources, right? If I'm not rich in those 11 resources, I trust you enough that I will allow you to help me build then those resources. And in a school setting, right, it is one of the most important things that we can do. Because that's where they come to get food. It's where they're coming to feel safe. It's where they're coming to interact with people. It's where they have adults that are supposed to care. An adult that doesn't backhand me when I say que instead of mande usted. An adult, that doesn't judge me. An adult that isn't, that is supposed to nurture me and things like that. And this comes then into the work that you do, right? Because if they don't experience and feel that at home and at school or in their community, they're bringing that trauma and that angst into your counseling session, right? And that ability to create that relationship without crossing the line creates the pathway for you to help them change their behaviors. And so this is taken, again, directly from Covey. The deposits and withdrawals in relationships. Seek first to understand instead of being understood. That means that I'm able to listen. That means that, this is how we nurture and grow compassion and empathy, right? Grace. I am a firm believer that if you are not willing to show grace to someone else, you have no right to expect to receive it. So if you're not willing to give someone a shot, a break, or a chance, right? Don't get pissed when they don't give it to you, all right? And it's not because that's bad karma, but we know that goodness is reciprocal. The more you give it, the more comes back to you. And so if you're not able to seek out, right, to seek that understanding, then don't be surprised when someone doesn't even want to bother to try and understand what you're going through as well. Keeping promises, clarifying expectations. With expectations, I use this when I do management and leadership training. I say, you have no right, you have no right to, sorry, I'm having a moment here. You have no right to judge someone for not meeting an expectation that you haven't communicated, right? So I can't get upset at you for not meeting an expectation that I only had in my mind, right? And as adults, we tend to do that. Not only in our interactions with kids and youth, right, but we also do it in the workplace as well. So I can't hold you accountable to an expectation that I haven't communicated and you haven't acknowledged, okay? And then the other piece of this then in creating relationships, this one actually now looks at poverty and people experiencing poverty, right? So with deposits and withdrawals. And what's important here is, again, this contrast on this behavior. And then what it causes for us mentally that then becomes our behaviors, right? So being able to assist with setting goals as opposed to telling you, right? If I only come in telling you what to do, then oftentimes I'm not going to accomplish it, right? And again, you see the relationship between those. Bridging and bonding capital is extremely important, and especially differentiating between the two because we tend to sometimes confuse them and use them synonymously. So bridging capital is what helps you get ahead. Bonding capital helps me get by. And so I don't have the money to pay the electric bill, the power gets shut off, right? You help me run an extension cord from your apartment or from your house to mine, right? That's bonding capital. You help me just get by. Bridging capital is you share with me about a program that allows me, because I meet a certain income requirement or something like that, that I qualify for a program for reduced rate. Okay? That's bridging. That helps me get ahead as opposed to just survive. Understanding the difference between these and then being able to teach people how to identify those relationships is important as well, because the bonding is transactional, right? I give, you take, or vice versa. Bridging, is transformational. And that's the type of work that we want to do, right? That's how we change our communities and change lives. So here, this diagram here, the inner circle is the bonding capital that we have, people that we know, right? And the outside is bridging. So in each of these different groups, right, I encourage you to look at what your bonding capital is versus your bridging capital. So for neighbors and family, right? So do you have family and friends that just help you get by, or do they actually help you get ahead? And sometimes they're going to be in both, and that's okay. They're dancing that line depending on the relationship, okay? But for religious organizations, for school, being able to do your own assessment helps you have patience and grace then for others that maybe don't have as much as you do. What I've also found is that by doing this, I'm oftentimes realizing that I had access to more resources than I realized. So doing this with a partner, with someone else, helps to bring that dialogue, right? So that if I say, well, I don't have anyone in any clubs, right? I would tell you that the group that's in here, for me, forms a club. It forms a group of supportive individuals working toward a common goal, okay? Being able to identify that then helps me know that I have access to resources. Disposable ties is extremely important as well because in poverty, again, it's transactional. I will use you as long as I need you, and then if I no longer need you, I'm okay saying goodbye. In middle class and wealth, it's transactional, and it involves some form of a payment. So it's somebody providing a service. Okay? It's somebody that's doing something to help me, but I either pay them a fee, a salary, a wage, or something. They receive something for it. Okay? So in disposable ties, it could be that I don't make enough income to qualify to rent this apartment. I happen to hear that you need somewhere to live as well. You're in the same situation. So we come together to be able to rent this apartment and we become housemates, roommates, okay? But then, if one of us separates, we can go our separate ways. It's not bad, okay, but it's transactional as opposed to transformational. And we will see that in working in economic poverty, a lot of the relationships are transactional, okay? Knowing that then, when we interact with them and we're trying to help them, sometimes the entry is a transactional act. That helps to build the trust. And then, once I have that trust, I can then move into the transformational. And so, key points to remember in this, okay? And again, these are in the notes, and you have all of my notes because there's quite a bit of narrative for each of this. It's relative. It's all based off of who I know and with whom I interact. It occurs in all races. If you notice, I haven't talked about race and ethnicity. And the reason for it is that I firmly believe in the work of Dr. Payne, Ruby Payne believes, poverty doesn't care what color I am. It doesn't care about my gender, my ethnicity, my preference, none of that. However, there are structural, systemic situations that have caused poverty, economic poverty, or any of those other resource poverty situations for groups in a higher propensity than others, okay? Redlining is one of the best examples. Who knows what redlining is? Can somebody please share loud enough because we have a mic that we need you to be able to pick up. I saw a hand go up. I saw two hands go up in the back. So in Texas, and I think it was the Dallas area, if I'm not mistaken, but in Texas, there was a situation where they had these communities, and the lenders for the loans literally drew a red line creating these districts where they said blacks would not be allowed to buy in these neighborhoods. And it became systemic then. They intentionally set out to block access to a certain race of living in a certain community. It's called redlining. It doesn't happen, it's illegal. But I used to serve on the Planning Commission in the city of Laverne. We never did this. But I learned a lot about how we create policy in order to keep things out, right? What businesses we allow to come in. What centers we allow to come in. There was a shopping center. We were opening up it was a business partnership with some other people. We were opening up a tutoring center. And we found a great spot. And when we went to go get the information, the city would not allow a tutoring center in this shopping center on the first floor. But they would allow it on the second floor. And when we asked why, they said it's because they wanted foot traffic and things like that. And we said, but seriously, this is a tutoring center. You know, here are the literacy rates for this community. Don't we want to improve them? We will create policy to make it easier for something, oftentimes not carrying about the impact that that policy has, right? But here, it occurs, poverty we know occurs in all races, in the entire country, in every state, and some higher than others, okay? One of the things, I was presenting one time to a business group, and they asked me the question, it was Q&A time, and they again, things that trigger me. They said, but Sid, come on, like poor people want to be poor, Like they choose that lifestyle. I mean, they have access to all these other things that you had access to and that we have access to, right? And like, how many of them are on the welfare system, Sid? And then they said the two other things. And so this is how I responded to their three questions. I said, first, I want the record to reflect that you asked the question and I'm answering it, okay? So one, I'm answering your question. You asked for this, basically, okay? Two, there's a quote that I like, and that is that I will not remain silent so that you can remain comfortable, right? So let the record reflect it's going to get uncomfortable. And so some of them laughed, and stuff like that. And it got especially uncomfortable because the second thing they said is, instead of using the term undocumented, they said illegals. That really triggers me too, okay? And so I had to give a group of business people a grammar lesson, which is funny considering I'm ESL, right? But I know. So what I said to them is, did you know that the highest percentage, race, okay? Highest percentage that uses food stamps is what?
White.
It's white. It's not black and it's not brown. And they called BS. They said I was wrong. I said, look it up, man. And somebody did. They Googled it right on the spot, okay? Our natural assumptions to criminalize poverty automatically attaches race and ethnicity to it. And the reason that society chooses to criminalize poverty is because if I classify you as a criminal, I don't have to give you grace, empathy, or compassion. Because you're a bad person, so I can treat you like crap. Poverty, when we truly look at it, first and foremost, and we look at those 11 resources don't care about our color. They don't care about any of those other things. But society and systems have created it more difficult for certain race, ethnicities, and groups, okay? And then, again, the difference between generational, situational, that this work is based off of patterns, that we bring with us the hidden rules that we're exposed to. Schools and businesses operate off of middle-class norms. And just knowing that one, and especially as you're working on school sites, right? Especially if you're in the field of education as an educational leader, it's one of the most difficult things to change. I spent almost 15 years working in higher ed, predominantly in the community college system, and trying to get systemic change in a bureaucratic system. And honestly, is one of the reasons that I left, because I was so frustrated with it. But we can't stop trying to make that structural change, to make the system easier to access and not convenient for me, the employee. And then, again, for our clients to be successful, we got to understand where they're coming from, especially these hidden rules. If we can teach the hidden rules, and that helps to explain why people behave the manner in which they do, okay, then we can help shift this mindset and behavior. And then we can teach someone how to go from poverty to middle class and from middle class to wealth. And we've done it, and so we know that it can be done. And then in order to move from poverty to middle class to wealth, at some point we have to give up some relationships. I left home at the age of 14. I went to boarding school. I was thinking about being a priest, so I went to a seminary. So that means when I was 14, I left the city of El Monte where we lived. And we grew up on a street, it's called the Klingermans. And the houses where I was, 2 blocks out, it's just rows and rows of apartments. It's where all the, a lot of bad and illegal activity took place. The gang in Monteflores EMF had a lot of activity there as well. It's where I did a lot of my travesuras, my mischievous stuff. And yet I left El Monte and I went to boarding school, and that's when I was told that I should go to college. And I went to Catholic school. So even still in those first 8 years, it wasn't ingrained and drilled into me. And yet, if you ask my parents why they came to this country, their American dream is very simple. Wanted their kids to have access to education. They wanted us to be homeowners, and they wanted us to have jobs with insurance. Those are the 3 things my mom told me drove them to come here. Okay? My dad, though, not finishing, the first grade, didn't understand the expectations that come from being a student. So I was off in boarding school, I was in the seminary, and I get a call, and it's from my dad, and he says, "Mijo, te necesito este fin de semana. I need you this weekend, you need to come down, I need your help." I said, "Dad," and I getting exposed to great programs in boarding school, and I said, "Dad, I can't, I got this, this, and this," and he says, "Muchacho, si no te estoy pidiendo, te estoy mandando." I says, "Kid, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you." Right? And I was like, "Oh, shoot." I said something else. I had the courage of distance. And what I mean by that is that I wasn't in front of him. I was on the phone. So I had the courage then to disobey and say, "I'm not going." And then this immediate guilt that kicked in, right? So one, I'm Mexican, so there's just Mexican guilt, right? Then I'm Catholic, right? So throwing Catholic Mexican guilt, and it's bad, man. And so, and I say that only half jokingly, okay, because it's true. And so then I said, wait, maybe I need to ask him what's going on. I said, "Dad, disculpa, ¿qué está pasando? What's happening? What do you need?" And he said, "I'm going to have a yard sale this weekend, and I need your help getting things out of the garage in order to put them out to sell." I didn't go, and my dad was pissed, And I guarantee you, though, that if you were sitting in that kitchen where my dad was when we were talking on the phone, and you asked him, "Do you support Siriako being in school and going to college and all that?" he would have said, "Absolutamente, si es la razón por la cual venimos." Because those are the words that he used. Absolutely, it's the reason we came to this country. That disconnect of expectation, right? And we see it a lot in our families that are coming from poverty families, right? Economic poverty families. Not understanding, it's what they call us sellouts, right? It's then that they tease us because instead of everyone calling me Siriako, somebody started calling me Sid, and I couldn't get them to stop, right? And my mom used to tease me, especially because I'm named after my grandfather, her dad, right? But that's some of this disconnect that can happen, right? That's some of the cultural nuances that come added then to economic situations. So the final thoughts that I have, because I did want to leave time for questions and answers and have some dialogue. Rita Pearson, the late Rita Pearson, unfortunately she passed away, did this TED Talk and this incredible video that I'm going to play. But she believes every child deserves a champion. An adult who never gives up on them, understands the power of connection, and insists that they become the best they can possibly be. And I want to play this video. Let's hope that Murphy is visiting someone else.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. I said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class. Because I am the best teacher and you are the best students, they put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise, you just have to strut. And I gave them a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so, I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on his paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Rita Pearson, like I said, unfortunately passed away. And her daughter, Kristen, works in a lot of this work with Dr. Ruby Payne as well. And I've gotten a chance to know Kristen, and we worked together on a project. So this book that you each received, Bridges Out of Poverty, it actually talks about how we transform communities. And we do it by looking through these multiple lenses. And so we look at the individual. Everything that I cover today is just in the individual lens. When you go through this book, and the reason I wanted to start with this one is because the work that you're doing is transformational for communities. Because the growth, the resources that you will build in the children, the kids, and the families that you serve, they take that back and share it with others. And so the power that you will give to these families is power then that they're going to be able to share in their community. And that's how we change it. Because if all we do is wait for someone else to give a damn about changing our community, we will stay in the same situation that we are in. And it's not because I don't trust elected officials or politicians. It's not that I don't trust community groups or churches. It's not that I don't trust schools or businesses or other individuals. It's that for too long we have played the blame game and expected everyone else to fix what's wrong in my front yard and backyard, and it hasn't happened. And so in a Bridges construct, in a Bridges community, we bring representatives then that are experiencing poverty, middle class, and wealth, that are part of the business, religious, education, law enforcement, first responder community, and elected officials and politicians, all at the same table, committed to transform that community. And that leads to one of the other programs that Dr. Payne created called Getting Ahead in a Just Getting By World. And in that program, individuals participate in what's like a cohort, but we don't call it that. They're not students. We call them investigators because they are investigating their life and their community and then making choices to improve it, change it, and create a future story for themselves. Okay? And so the second book then that I recommend is the one that it's in the slides, right? A Framework on Understanding Poverty. And then directly connected to the work that you do as well is Dr. Payne's work called Emotional Poverty. And she came out with the second version of that. And so those are books that I would recommend. I've shared them with Dr. Cardenas and his team as well. And it even led to the invitation for me to be here today. And then the final thing I'll say before we open it up to questions and answers is this. I firmly believe in the power of mental health resources. I've accessed them myself. It's what helped me deal with anger, with depression, with resentment, with the loss of my mother. I'm a huge mama's boy. And even after being gone, I would call my mother every day still. And just that connection that I had, and then to lose that connection, right? We tell people to get over things, right? And we know that with grief, Dr. Kubler-Ross, Kubler-Ross's work says you never get over it, right? You just learn to deal with it. Every day it does get a little bit easier, and that hole that is left in the heart never gets filled. I would tell you that with trauma, then, as you know, or as you will know as you further your studies in this area, and especially as we look at ACEs and we look at every social, emotional, well-being of our kids, that if we don't pay attention to that part, those holes that are caused in their hearts and their souls and their minds and in their bodies through trauma never get properly dealt with. And so the service that you're going to provide is truly going to not only help them today, but equip them with the resources that they need for tomorrow to write their future story and then to be able to actualize it. So I thank you for your commitment to the work that you're doing. I wish you well, and I just commend you for your willingness to care. I want to open it up for questions and answers about anything that we either shared or even something else that you might have a question about that for some reason you think I might be able to answer. Yes.
It's been in my experience, and when I contextualize it, it does make a lot of sense, but I think my colleagues could also agree that part of it is too, right? There is this reverence for authority in our culture. So sometimes I often struggle to kind of dismantle that, right? I do as much as I can. But looking at those, mental models and those hidden rules of the different class systems, from your experience, is there anything that I could especially do to say, this is a space where there is no negative expression that you can express, right? Because I think my experience is a lot of those monosyllabic responses, it's not disrespect, I've often been called sir, mister, right? It's hard to, dismantle that assumption of me as a person of authority, right?
Sure. So a couple things with that. One, my brother helped me realize something a number of years ago. I think I was still working at the college, and I was probably a vice president or something. And he asked me how work was doing. I explained the situation, and then he goes, "Oh man, you've become the man." And I thought, what? And he says, "Well, you're the one making the rules." And it was an aha moment, and it scared the crap out of me. Because it was that reminder then of this incredible responsibility that comes with our positions, right? And so forget the title, right? It's important if you use it correctly. And if you waste it, and you just create further trauma, or you create further obstacles for people to get ahead, then that's where it's wasted, in my opinion, right? And so that's one. Two, imposter syndrome really starts to kick in, right? I've been in rooms and in situations, and I'm regarded as an expert in areas of poverty, right, and neglect and abuse because of the work that I do. I spent 15 years in higher ed and have been able to do these amazing things, and yet I hear the reference toward it, and even to hear doctor, and it still makes me uncomfortable at times, right? And so I've learned over the years what I call, and some people don't like that I use this term, right? But I have developed the arrogance of confidence, right? To say, bullshit, I belong, right? Not only because I did the time, but because I've done the work, right? Because I come from that community, because I've been told no, but I've also been told yes. And so building this confidence, right, that I say I belong at the table. Then I hear my dad saying, no abuses de lo que tienes, right? Don't take advantage, what you have, right? Use it for good. And I hear my mom on the other shoulder telling me to be kind and be good and to help and to serve, right? So I have these voices on my shoulder that are guiding me as well, right? That helps me then there's a term one of my mentors taught me, it's called head trash, right? And I use this term a lot because head trash are those self-talks and even the stuff other people say that starts to build in my mind and it starts to weigh me down. And normally, we wait for the trash can to get full before we throw it out, right? With head trash, you gotta dump that stuff fast, man. Because if we wait for the can to get full, I am weighted down so much, right, that then I can't move forward. I can't get past what's holding me back, right? And so part of it then that I've learned is to keep my head trash in check as well, okay? Then the other piece that I'd say is, we've talked about creating safe space, right? But there's something else, and it's an article, I'll write down to send it to Dr. Cardenas to share with you, but it talks about creating brave space, right? And so I do a lot of work also in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and I receive some training in those areas. And I'm coaching these organizations right now. They're going through a fellowship on diversity, equity, inclusion, and stuff. And this one particular organization was really talking about this safe space and brave space piece. Safe space means that I feel empowered enough to feel safe enough to belong at that table, right? Safe space means that I am not judged by my background and who I am today. It means that I am welcomed just as I am for who I am and what I am. Brave space then, though, allows me to speak out and up about all of that. And so brave space allows me to challenge someone when they're saying something inappropriately or inappropriate, right? Even if they do it unknowingly, right? Brave space makes it okay for me to say, hey, wait a minute, you know what? He wasn't done talking. She wasn't done talking. They weren't done speaking, right? Okay, everyone has a chance to have a voice. That means you need to let them have a voice as well. Brave space says, that's not okay in this environment, right? Brave space says, that's wrong. I challenge people to go from creating safe space first, right? Because that's what allows us to come into the room and to the table. And then I challenge groups to empower themselves to be brave in their space as well, right? It is absolutely okay for us to do that. Because if I don't do it, it's just going to continue to happen, right? Because it's been happening. Feel empowered, right? Know that you can. And the reality is that your training, our training, those letters behind our name and in front of our name, give us a level of credibility. How are you going to use it? What are you going to do with it, right? I say use it. Use it to develop that confidence to accept the fact that someone is looking at you and toward you because you are a subject matter expert. Will you get it wrong? Absolutely. We're still going to make mistakes, right? And what Dr. Pearson said about, forgiveness, students, because I also taught, students have been the best teachers of forgiveness. When I've lost it and I've disciplined a class and I went overboard on it and stuff like that, and the next day they're just looking and saying, hi, Mr. Pinedo, right? It's like they taught me just to remember that it's okay to move on and move forward, right? So we got to do that to ourselves as well. Give yourself permission. Make sense? Questions, comments? I take complaints too. I don't know if I can resolve them, but... I know we have a break. Oh yeah, please.
Yes, quickly. In looking at the diagram that you provided on generational poverty, and you mentioned it takes a number of years or generations, I'd say, to move from one to the other. I'm just wondering, in your experience, what have you found to work when working in the different capacities that you shared, to moving families or communities that find themselves in generational poverty? That, by the way, I was really touched by your story about your mom, had a similar story. I'll share it with you later. But my question is, what are some of the things that, and your dad, I should say.
Sure.
When you get, the reason we're here is because we want to provide an education. We want to help you, get the house, have insurance and so on and so forth. What have you found to be helpful when trying to move families and a community to continue with their education when they've checked off all the boxes and they're ready to go, but then there's this term that is used in education, it's called, now I'm having one of those moments, because I'm a man of a certain age, when they check off all the boxes, they've gained admission, and they don't go. And the reason they don't go, 9 times out of 10, it's fear.
Yeah.
But they're ready to go.
Yeah.
And often, I don't want to say that they're comfortable, because that's on the surface, it's like, no, I don't want to challenge myself, and so on and so forth. But I know that a student's part-time job that's helping support the family.
Yeah.
I know that disrupting that family unit in a way, because there isn't that distance that you talked about.
Right.
And I haven't developed my own I haven't developed myself in a way where I can say no, because I want to stay true to my own goals and values.
Yeah.
And then there's a window of time that this needs to happen, because if it doesn't happen, then these certain opportunities that you've worked all this time for, gaining admission to university, you need to tell me by May 1st or whatever, is now gone.
Yeah.
You might have to go somewhere else or start somewhere else. And you may not make it because you didn't want to disrupt that.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, that's a long-winded way of saying,
No, it's fair.
I'm curious, what are some of the strategies and the research that you found that really help move the needle so that both things can be true? Mija will come back and help you. In fact, she'll probably end up taking care of you because, that Catholic guilt.
Yeah, right.
We take care of our...
Yeah.
And so the situational piece doesn't allow us to think beyond that because we're stuck in the now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just curious to hear what are some of the strategies that you found in your work that might help.
I want to look at 2 hidden rules here. I want to look at destiny and education, and let's look at destiny first. Destiny in a poverty mindset says, look, I can't change anything. I was born into this life. It's just the way it is, right? And then the language that we hear around that, sometimes from our own family, is, it's just the way it is for us, right? Don't be a sellout. What, you're too good to live here now? All that stuff, all that crap that comes into that, right? In middle class for destiny, we know that I have choices, right? I make choices. I choose this, and so this happens, and so on, right? And then in wealth for destiny, this, release oblige, means it's this obligation to do good to help others, okay? And not in a patronizing way, all right? In a true, genuine manner, okay? So that's first destiny, what's driving, right? I can't change anything, I live in a shitty world, and that's just the way it is, okay? Now, for education, remember I talked before about abstract mindset, abstract behavior, right? Education is something that is truly abstract, because I'm going to work for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years for a bachelor's, another 2 or 3 years for a master's, and then another 2 to 4 years for a doctorate, right? So on the low end, right, what is that, 4, 6, 8 to 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. For something that I'm taking loans out for and all of that, right? Look, I am still paying on my student loans, all right? I don't even fret about it anymore. Because if I had chosen 30 years or 20 years ago, whenever it was, to not sign that document for that first student loan, I would not be standing in front of you today. Okay? So parents like me sometimes until they hear me speak. And this is what I mean by that. Years ago, my wife works for the Almonte City School District. She's now the Director of Instruction and Assessment for the district, but she's been with that district, I think, 25 years. And they invited me to speak one time at a school where she was working, Potrero Elementary School. And so I give my talk and everything to the parents, and then a parent comes up to me afterwards. She said, Dr. Pinedo, por favor, habla con mi hija. Please, talk to my daughter and this and that. And I said, well, what's going on? And she says, she wants to leave, she wants to go, she's graduating from high school, and she wants to leave the country, and, she wants to go to Colombia, and this and that. And I'm like, hey, Colombia, wow, that is going, And so I said, well, are you from there? She goes, no, somos de Mexico, and this and that, we're from Mexico, whatever. So she brings the daughter and everything, okay? And then, in front of the daughter, she says, in Spanish again, she says, please, Dr. Pinedo, tell her not to leave and go to Colombia, to just go to Rio Hondo, the community college down the street. And look, I went to Rio, so I don't have anything. I had almost 12 amazing years as an administrator in the community college system, okay? So I'm a firm believer in it. And then it clicked. Colombia wasn't a country. No, it's a university. Right? So I said to her, I told the daughter to step away, and I said, mire, señora. I said, I'll talk to your daughter, but I'm telling you right now, you are not going to like what I'm going to tell her. Because I'm going to tell her to go. I'm going to tell her that she has an incredible opportunity. It was a full ride, man. Why wouldn't I? And yes, I knew the gender issues, right? I knew the traditional family structure issues, right? Look up here under, where is it? I lost it. Here, household dynamics. And poverty tends to be matriarchal, right? Here it tends to be patriarchal, and then here depends on who has the money, right? This mother, though, she thought she was doing the right thing of keeping her family together, right? And so I told her what I was going to do, and I talked to her talked to the daughter in front of the mom, and in Spanish, and I said, mija, you need to go. I said, I'm sorry. I said, your parents are going to be mad. And this, man, I could feel the mom's eyes on me, man. Right? Like I needed an escort to my car later kind of stuff. Right? And I told her, and I tried to explain, So we had a large movement in higher ed years ago where we thought that all we had to do was increase access. Right? There's a saying in education, access without support is not opportunity. Access without support is not opportunity. Dr. Tinto said that, T-I-N-T-O. And so we thought, let's open the doors and get them here. We never provided the support systems to talk to family members about why they needed to go, right? And so one is, and my example was the best, I had to leave home, right? My two brothers didn't. And so we have to figure out how, in a safe space, to be able to do it. What I've also learned is that in traditional Latino, Hispanic, Spanish, houses, right? We have to be careful about a female telling a man what to do in their family structure, right? I've seen female teachers scold an adult male because their kid was misbehaving, right? And I don't know what held that man back to not backhand that woman. He shouldn't do that, right? But you could see the anger building in there. We also have to teach that in our institutions and our structures of how to communicate with the families. Should it matter that a female is telling a male? No, it shouldn't, but the fact is that it does. And if I'm more concerned on changing that dynamic, I have now just caused a pathway for trauma into that home. Because that man will go home and take it out on every single one of those members in that house, right? So if my goal is to increase access to higher ed, I need to look at the support systems that I'm putting into place in order to do that. And you all have an opportunity to do that, right? Is it ever okay for a woman to tell a man? Yes, it is, actually. if you have established that relationship where they turn to you, and you do it in private, right? You don't shame them into doing it that way because it doesn't work. There is a way. That's one of the ways that I've seen where we've been able to do it to break the generational poverty cycle.
It sounds like it goes back to the relationship that you were talking about, and continuing trust. By the way, it's summer mellow, and that was a term that I was having a breakdown on. And so, yeah, that's what I was trying to speak to. Thank you for
And then the last thing, I'm sorry, we're on time. The last thing I'll say, that quote I started with, seeing yourself reflected brings you dignity. That's why it's important for you all to tell your story. Because oftentimes what will happen then is that the adult will say, how did you do it? Right? And that's how then you can start to create that, that dialogue where you explain that it's safe to leave, that it's okay, and that we come home. We come back to serve, right? We come back to take care of. And so I've been able to explain as well, even to my dad, right, about leaving. Of being able to say, I'm going to get an education that'll help me get a better job, that'll allow me to come back and help, Dad. And it's the difference between struggling, right, and then just being okay. Make sense? Sorry, I went over. Dr. Cardenas?
It's okay, we gave you a buffer of time. So.
He knows.
One of the things I want you to talk about, because I don't see it there, but I'm sure you have a way of linking it. Getting back to that issue in terms of not only for males, but for females, but for males, parents, the transition and help, and their kids leave the house and go to college and all that. And it's like, for persons who are very religious, they're like associating with that idea that rich people are immoral. You're not going to go from this pobres, pero tenemos no know how to respect ourselves, my casa, and all that stuff. And the fear is like, you're going to go to college, and then it is true in college, like, you do all the help you want, right? Because nobody's there supervising you, and even though you're not necessarily an adult, you can do adult things. So that, that part of it too, that I think a lot of times people don't touch on, is like being able to communicate to them. It's like, just because you go to college doesn't mean that you're going to automatically lose your morality. In fact, some colleges will have a chapel. Did you know that Stanford has a chapel, and how the who developed this, etc. So, and that how that fits.
Sure. So in my seminary studies, we had a priest that was taught a class. It's called homiletics, basically how to preach, right? How to tell, how to give a sermon and stuff like that. And the reason I say it is not because I'm going to get into more preaching here, but there's a line that he said in there that really impacted me. And he said that the best homily, the best sermon you will ever give is the one you need to hear yourself. And as I take that out and look at the transferability of that lesson is this. The best communication you will have with a parent is the one that you would need to hear as a parent if you were sitting in their chair. But in order for that to happen, it means you got to get outside of yourself, right? And so I went through this. I didn't show this particular slide, but I need to show it now because it talks about that. Sorry. And I lied. I can't find it. It's a slide that talks about how in order for me to hear you, right, I got to be able to listen. And in order for me to listen, I need to put myself in your shoes, right? And so in order to do that, I have to be able then to open my mind. And then I can come back and process and figure things out, okay? So when it comes to that, the reason I started with that is because even in our parent programs, right, we're telling them what we think they need to hear. How often or when have we even bothered to ask them, why don't you want to let them go? And that language, even though, right, that's oppressive language, we need to ask it in that way because it gives the impression that I care about what it is that you're thinking, that I understand what it is that you're thinking, okay? And then I'm able to answer the questions. And then experience has taught me that they're going to ask probably these 10 questions, okay? But I got to go through the process. There's a saying, go slow to go fast, right? I got to go slow enough to be able to engage you. So if their issue is that they're not going to come back, Se van a olvidar de nosotros is one of the fears, right? Yes, this morality piece. They're no longer going to go to church. What are they going to eat, right? Who's going to help them? Who's going to wash their underwear? All these things, right? Those are all things that I've heard, right? I have to let them tell me and then provide that response. And with the morality piece, which is a big, big concern for our parents and for our generation today, is that we just have to reinforce that you've raised a good kid, man. You've raised a good young adult. And so I will engage in a dialogue to ask them, what do you do? What have you done in this situation? What do you do? And then I'm able to build up that parent, right? And just say, God, you did really good. Just that little piece of reinforcement helps to build that confidence, right? And then we got to tell them, because we got to do this in our parenting and our outreach programs as well, is we got to prepare the young people or the college students, right? Here's what your parents are thinking. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with it, all right? You just got to understand them. And so what behaviors can you put into place to help alleviate some of that, right? When I speak in parenting classes and stuff, what I tell the young people, the younger ones, is I've learned now that life would have hurt a lot less had I listened to my parents more, right? And I tell the parents that I've come to that realization, and I tell them, but you can't tell them that I said that, right? Because as soon as they know that, then that creates that division again and stuff. To answer also Dr. Cardenas's point is, yes, our parents are afraid, right? Because they were raised with that fear as well. When we look at how they were raised back in their native countries, right? They didn't leave that town. Our family, so Dr. Cardenas's mom was my mom's sister, okay? And so they were still raised that the youngest daughter could not marry until the parents passed away, right? So they were still raised with that mindset. It didn't happen, though. And so my mom ended up, marrying later because she helped to take care of them and stuff. But she did it out of love. And I think because she had that choice to do it, it came from this place of affection, right? And choice. The choices that our parents make and how they raise us and how they're raising their kids stems directly back from their experience. And then we bring them into this new country that is telling young people, you have a voice and speak up. Man, that stuff didn't work at home. I remember the day that they did the abuse talk at school, right? And stuff. So I went home and I forgot what stupid thing I said. My dad backhanded me and I threatened to call the cops, right? Man, I can tell you this. I got a good one that day, because that's just how they were raised. Right? I deserved every cachetada. I deserved every slap in the face that I got because I was a smart aleck kid, right? And I was mischievous. But my dad took it too far because he didn't know, right? And it's not that I'm condoning the behavior, but that's just the way our parents acted and behaved. Their fear is coming from losing us and us reinforcing that we can still be around and still help, or that we're going to be okay because of them, is how we help to create a little bit of that safe and brave space for them. Sorry.
No, thank you. Can we all give a round of applause to Dr. Siriako Quesada, also perhaps the less uncomfortable title, my Theo. Thank you so much for being here. We see you and we appreciate your wisdom that you bring to this community. We also want to thank Mission College for allowing us this space to have this. This could have been virtual, probably, but it is really important that we are here face to face, that we are having these relationships. And so we thank Mission, we thank the facilities. And I thank you all for being here. And yes, there's a little bit of uncertainty right now, but we do what we do out of love and out of care for the students and to bring them and provide bridging opportunities, right?